welcome to another episode of Ask the GrowBot. I'm Jesse Porter with GrowGlide, joined by Will Gonzalez, as usual, Wrangler of the GrowBot and Director of Marketing and Creative Tech. We also brought along Mike Lomuto today, who I've known for a few years. We'll let Mike make an intro, but I'm going to go ahead and wax poetic at the beginning of this introduction, which is, we were both members of the NCIA. We traveled around, did panels and speaking engagements, and found each other in these wonderful scenarios where we were supporting ideas that were really creative, really small, but making a big difference in the space. And since then, we've all gone on to do more and more things, which is why it's great to reconnect. But to see the difference that you've made, like I said, that's what makes it so hard to do an introduction. Like I was telling you, is it Down Mastery? Is it the Power Hour, which is a wonderful resource that I've had the luxury of being a part of? Is it listening to the Minority Report podcast that you do so eloquently? Is it the NCIA DEI committee and your leadership there and the access to politics? So anyway, I'll let you do a little intro and help us guide some questions to the GrowBot, man. But I appreciate you joining us, brother.
Oh man, I appreciate being here. I appreciate you reaching out and the invite and being able to take this time and connect with you. You mentioned the Power Hour. That was a great week that we had you on there. Power Hours are Ask Me Anything that we do at the NCIA. It's actually evolved. We now have we're doing a format where we rotate the Ask Me Anything one week, where we bring somebody like yourself on, and then the other week we do an accountability group. So where we share each other's progress and updates and set goals for the next 2 weeks, and then we check back in on that 2 weeks later. So kind of like a mastermind, I guess, is kind of what it's evolved into, but really free form, so to speak. But like Jesse said, I've been at the NCAA for a few years now, and just kind of helping build out the DEI program. And my main passion is really just connecting folks and connecting with folks and really finding the tribe, right? Finding like-minded folks that believe that this industry needs to be built the right way. And, whether you've been in it for 25, 30 years, whether you've been in it for 2 days, as long as, you have the right mindset around what the industry needs to be, what it needs to look like, and how it needs to be set up, I think that's what I'm always trying to find is people that we connect with, and find alignment with. So really glad to be here today, man.
Yeah, man, I think a lot of what you do really supports the career-oriented approach to a lot of people take to cannabis these days, where it's like, how can I continue to progress, learn different skills, lean into other people around me? You're a wonderful resource from a connective tissue perspective, man. Like, it's always great to, see who you bump into when you're leaning over Mike's shoulder at these shows. But that said, I bet once we ask the GrowBot some questions, you're going to realize the GrowBot's been leaning over your shoulder too. And when I was thinking about questions to ask the GrowBot, when I got to thinking about what kind of questions I'd want to ask the GrowBot with you on, initially I just thought, hey, let's ask about the challenges minorities face in the cannabis space. And part of me is like, man, that's sort of like a softball question. Like, we should probably ask it and see what ChatGPT has to say. But then I also thought, what does it know about DEI? Let's throw it something vague enough to trigger a multitude of different directions and see what kind of impact we've been able to make. And then more importantly, I was like, man, what about leaders in the space? So there's a lot to unpack there, but maybe we start with like, all right, ChatGPT, and maybe Will can have a good follow-up to dial in as we sort of talk a little bit about minority diversity, right? And from my perspective, my story, right? I grew for years in Oakland, and the people that helped me build what I built didn't have the same skin tones as me. And when I go into commercial facilities today, Mike, and you know this, right? It's some of the most diverse working environments you'll see, from trim room staff to cultivation default to people doing cleanup to all the way up the food chain to head growers that were born in different countries. And I think what we're seeing is this evolution of the cultivation knowledge that's creating careers. That's one example in the cultivation space. I think you're helping do it in the political space, the consulting space. But anyway, let's see what kind of answers the GrowBot has for.
So I'm starting off with a pretty general question. What challenges do minorities face in starting a successful business or commercial cultivation facility in the cannabis industry? We'll see what the GrowBot has to say about this. Capital.
Systemic societal issues, specific regulatory financial barriers. Absolutely. Capital, regulatory complexity, social stigma. Yeah, social stigma is an important one there.
Criminal justice.
Criminal justice disparities, lack of industry representation. I'm curious as to how they pull all this, right? Like whose papers are they pulling this from? Whose websites are they pulling this from? It's fascinating to me, like how this works. Yeah.
Yeah, it's basically been trained on the internet up until the year 2021. So all the information you're seeing here is dated to 2021. It doesn't have like live access to the internet, so it's trained on a body of information, and it's just billions upon billions of bytes and
podcasts, webinars,
YouTube, all kinds of stuff. Yeah, so that's
an interesting script. Because I think like right out the gates, it nailed it, right? We were just like, cool, like, let's talk about how complicated that simple question is. And then it began to unpack it. And I know in various breakout sessions with you, each person, depending on their facility and their problems, has different issues in their way currently and 6 months ahead of them. But a lot of these are, like this is a pretty broad stroke, but it's a good jumping off point. I mean, is there something in particular to you? You've had a path where you've had to grind. Like I said, I see you doing so many things. I imagine you're the guy that wakes up at 4 a.m. and goes to sleep at 10 every day, right? And is that the secret sauce to just grind really hard so you touch it all? Or is there, something where you should focus on bridging local to national cannabis for guide rails for success, if you will?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up I am somewhat clockwork, I definitely am fluid with it for sure. But, going back to the Tao mastery side of things, right? I think, in Tao mastery, Taoism, it's about being fluid with things, but there's also a structure that you kind of find that fits you, that you put into place and you kind of roll with that. And, I think that, I'm a huge fan of small habits, right? One of the books I've been recommending lately to folks is Atomic Habits. I think it's Query is the author. And it's just when you get into the small habits, it just supports the bigger success that you're trying to go for. So I don't get up quite that early, not at 4 a.m. I was getting up at 5 a.m. every day for a while. I'm a little bit later now, but I'm pretty clockwork, and it's not who I thought I was going to be just a few years ago. I was like, kind of definitely getting up late and definitely all over the place with it. And a few years back, I hit my stride. And it's something I just always try to encourage to everybody is, everybody's different. We have different biorhythms, but at the same time, we still are human beings. We still live on this planet. And, the biorhythms at the end of the day, if you can find one that works for you, stick with it. I think that the more consistent we can be, consistency is so key to success. But that said, looking at this ChatGPT answers, what I'm curious about is this social stigma one. Cannabis use and production carry a stigma that can affect relationships with customers, suppliers, employees, and financial institutions. Minorities who may already face societal biases, this stigma can exacerbate the difficulty of establishing and running a business. So I'm curious as to kind of like where they're going with that. One of the things that we talk about sometimes when it comes to social stigma also is that in certain communities, right, that especially they've been impacted by the war on drugs, and there's a lot of stigma around, hey, is it legal yet? Is it not legal? Or even if it is legal, just the years of what it's done in a certain community, or maybe a certain family has lost members to either incarceration or worse. I think that when we're talking about this kind of stuff, we have to recognize that the industry has been stood up basically on two sources of capital, pretty much, right? There's the so-called private capital, or whatever it is, like the big firms, the big equity firms that have this money. And then there's the other side of it, which is just simply bootstrapping and getting money from friends and family, right? And when you're looking at minority communities in general in this country, there's less family money around in the first place, right? It's a generalization, but we're looking at generalities here. But when you then combine that with the fact that the family or the community may still have a strong stigma against cannabis, it can be really challenging to then navigate that. I talk with a lot of folks, whether, Black, brown, Asian, whatever it may be, who still haven't told their families that they're in the cannabis space because of the stigmas that come along with that. Not telling your family that you're in the cannabis space when you're trying to raise capital I mean, that's where a lot of people start, is you go to your family in your community to find capital. If you can't even tell the folks around you and in your community that you're doing what you're doing because of fear of whatever that may lead to, that's a big, blockade, a big roadblock. Aside from the fact that when we couple that with, on the other side of it, we don't know that we want to encourage people to be getting that money from friends and family necessarily if it's going towards trying to get a licensed business, which can be a very long, arduous process and take millions of dollars by the time you're done with it. And at the end of the day, put you in a situation where, like in California, where these businesses are not profitable and don't have more runway. So it's kind of this double-edged kind of catch-22, right? You don't necessarily have the access to the capital in your community, but then if you did get the access, do we really want to encourage people to go and get the little bit of cash that is, in a second mortgage, out of a second mortgage, or underneath the mattress, whatever it may be? That can lead to a lot of challenges too. So it's, that social stigma one, I think, is really interesting because it's not so simple. It's complex, right? Anyway, that's my 2 cents on that one.
I appreciate that, man. Like number 2 sort of pisses me off, right? Regulatory complexity. It's almost insulting, right? Like, yeah, it is complex. It's way more complex than it used to be, where you just fill out, a bunch of paperwork and you're like, we're good to go. We're making it up as we go. It's still complex for everybody. And thinking that for some reason, it maybe capital limits your ability to hire professional help that eases the pain of the regulatory complexities that everyone faces. I hear that argument, but don't insult me there, right? Like there's minority owners that know 10x as much as CFOs in the cannabis space because they've had to live it. Mm-hmm. So they know the complexities more than anybody else. And maybe their shoulder was being looked over a little bit more as they built their facility because they were a minority.
No, you hit that on the head, man. I mean, regulatory complexity. So I scanned right over that one because, of course, regulatory complexity is a problem, right? But that's a problem, as you pointed out, for everybody because the cannabis regulatory complexity is insane. But I think that now that I'm looking at it and through this other lens of, okay, well, that's what they're saying is one of the challenges for minority entrepreneurs specifically. It's something that, again, it goes to different stigmas, right? Yeah, because so generally speaking, people that qualify for social equity, right, in whatever capacity, whatever state that may be, have had to, by definition, pretty much navigate a regulatory structure and also, societal structures that the average cannapreneur even has not had to deal with. I would say that actually is, you hit that one on the head, man. I didn't even notice that one at first in that way.
And then obviously, like that leads to a number of other things, right? The whole fight for, equity from prosecution perspective, from industry representation perspective. And I love what I've seen over the past couple of years, this evolving connective clubs and organizations that support women or minorities, and they localize these organizations so they can be really dynamic in their local geography and still be connected to something like the NCIA or these bigger organizations so I think that's a really interesting spider web of steering where the opportunities are going. And that leads to limited opportunities for education and training, which is one of the reasons you're here, right? Is that you create opportunities for other people. You know how to connect someone that has a complicated HVAC question to the person that has an answer that'll pick up the phone and give them a couple of minutes so they can make a more informed allocation of their limited resources. I've seen that happen in real life, right? So I think that that's what's cool in the evolving space is that there's connective tissue, there's domestic, national connective tissue, and there's opportunities to use what we've learned. Other people have ground their way up to and are happy to give back. And I love that you're always willing to embrace that,
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Jesse. For me, it's constantly knowing, it comes from, it's that whole kind of adage that we talk about, I know what I don't know kind of a thing, right? And, if you know that you don't know, you need to get a bunch of folks that do know, right? And so it goes back to me. I remember when I got my first cell phone, or, maybe it was a second cell phone, whatever it was, 20 something years ago, whatever it was by now, it was one of those flip phones. And I remember that my main thing that I would always do when I would run into any problem, whatever the problem was, right? Whether it's, I got a problem with my car, or I need to figure out how to drum up some money, hustle some cash out together, whatever it may be. The first thing I would do is flip my phone open and start scrolling through the contacts list, right? And I don't think you could even search contacts back then. It was like you just had to literally scroll. And so, I'd scroll through the contact list, and I would just go until I found the person that could answer my whatever problem it was I was having. And that's kind of how I operate now. Is I try to automatically think, okay, look, it's not how, it's not what, it's who. I think that's one of the expressions I see out there a bunch in the memes and stuff. Not how, but who. And if you can quickly access who is it that can answer that question, I feel like we can move so much faster. The ego that I see out there in the world, and our industry is no different, I think is what often gets in our way, because we think that we have to have the answer. We have to know something. And the reality is that generally speaking, there's almost always an expert that has the experience that I might have done something once or twice and have an idea. But I guarantee you that Jesse working on HVAC stuff for how many years is going to have more experience and knowledge than I'm going to have, So why would I try to answer that question other than to simply say, hey, I got a number for you to call. So yeah, absolutely.
I think that's powerful, man. And I think speaking to that, maybe that drives our next question to the GrowBot here. I think about this a lot as someone who's had a journey through cannabis like you have for many years, who's done a bunch of different things, and we have that Rolodex of connected tissue. And we hear about the market struggling. We've always faced obstacles in our way. Like, what advice would you give someone that's starting a cannabis business today to plan for long-term financial success, right? Like, it's the classic future-proofing of cannabis question, right? Like, what advice do you give someone who's starting a new cannabis business so they're financially viable in the long run? And I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer. I think that it's just like, what advice would the GrowBot give?
Let's frame it a little bit. So like, who would you be asking this question to? Like a financial advisor, an experienced cultivator? Because we could ask it to say, I want you to act like a CFO. I want you to act like, whatever. What do you think we're asking?
Just leave it the way it is. I got it.
Okay. All right. Great.
Right. So one of the reasons to ask the question like this, right? Just what advice would you give someone starting a new business? It's like a Google search. And Mike, you and I both know some people don't have the money for consultants. They're doing their own due diligence. They're just throwing stuff at the internet online. Hey, Google, how do I start a cultivation facility? This, that, and the other thing. I think I just turned on my Google too.
The mic's off.
There we go. But the idea being is that these simple questions get thrown around a lot, and the relevance of the answers are driving industry decisions. So I think it's important that while it seemed like a simple question, like, look at the richness of this answer.
I love it. It's got all the little pieces in here, plan for the long term, but it's also very generic, right?
It is.
And there's some value in that, especially because I think that once you do this, then the next step I think is to go to a resource like NCIA, MCBA, or any of the local technical assistance type places, and take these questions to there and say, hey, let me find a webinar, let me find a podcast, let me find an expert, let me find a blog, whatever it may be, and then read that stuff or call that person. Something I always try to encourage people to do is, check out the webinar, but then follow up with the people that gave the webinar, right? Because there's nothing like talking to the person that actually has that knowledge and information that can apply it to you directly. And a big fan of coaching, all that kind of stuff, because I think it's that one-on-one interaction that helps us have that aha moment even deeper than the webinar's going to have. So
this episode is brought to you by GrowGlide's webinar series. Tune into presentations intended to fuel your success, introduce the GrowGlide team, and participate in live Q&A. Whether you're early on in the facility design or considering a retrofit, GrowGlide's webinars intend on helping you optimize airflow and room utilization, understand the impact of your racking options, and make informed decisions that lead to faster ROI. Join the team live or dive into a recording at growglide.com, consume the good stuff, and let GrowGlide help you facilitate your own success.
But definitely, there's so many resources out there now. And I think that, a lot of times people skip the resource first and go straight to the person. And I think that there's value in checking out the resource first and then contacting that person, so that you have kind of that ground to stand on. But this is great. One thing that pops up for me to answer the question, and going back to ABCs, really basics, is doing your financials every single day. Just getting into that habit. I always recommend everybody spend 30 minutes every day, whether it's in the morning, in the evening, whatever it is, with your financials if you're an entrepreneur. And at first that might be your personal finances, right? You might not have a business with revenue and all that other kind of stuff, but you spend 30 minutes with spreadsheets and bank accounts and all these different things, you'll start seeing pictures and patterns and noticing things that you wouldn't have noticed if you only simply wait until you have to look at your finances or somebody asks you for a financial spreadsheet or financial, projections, and you go fill out the information in an hour and whatever it may be. So that's one thing that comes up for me when you ask that question is just going back to the ABCs. If you're not doing that already, spending a regular time with your financials, that's the first thing that comes up, and then everything else follows.
I think the data collection concept's a big one, right? Like you got to collect data on your facility, and financial reporting is data. And I think so oftentimes we see people build this facility and then really try to track the financial data. Whereas if they're planning to impact certain KPIs and metrics, then you know when to invest where and where you're going to hold back relative to the importance of those metrics. And that's something I always try to think about when I ask people. It's like, well, what's really important to you, right? Are you an extract company? Are you a co-branding company? Are you this, that, or the other thing? Because as you know, it's like talk to everybody. You're the same approach. Like, let's talk to everybody and figure out what their problems are. So it's really interesting that everyone has a set of problems to overcome. They have resources in their back pocket to help them overcome them, but not all of them. And you have to sort of spend to get support in the other way. But like you said, invest in good support. Like invest in people you can trust, invest in vetted resources.
So I got a little bit more granular with that.
New question here.
I said, answer the same question, but I want you to act as an experienced cannabis grower that has been growing commercially for 5 or more years. What advice would you give based on your experience? And it's getting a little bit more like know your plan. It's getting a little bit quality over quantity, plan for the unexpected. It gives a little bit more insight, right? Like as somebody with experience.
I love the invest in your team piece there.
Yeah.
That's the one that I love. Yeah. Yeah, you don't see, in my opinion, the team development, leadership development, this is the stuff that you don't see enough of in our industry, in my opinion. I think the other stuff, it might be there, but it's more challenging to kind of, I think it can be more nebulous, put it that way, the invest in your team. People don't know where to start a lot of the time. And they feel like it's one of those soft costs, I guess, that you don't feel like you have to do. And so as a result, you skimp on it. But, I was having this conversation just yesterday about, the concept of putting lipstick on a pig, right? It's like, you can go ahead and keep investing in all these other things and, pretty things up. But if you don't have the right person to work with in the first place, if you don't have the right team, fundamentally speaking, you can have the best strategies in the world. You can hire the best consultants out there to give you the best strategies and so on and so forth. You have the best equipment. And if it's the wrong people that are executing, and when I say the wrong people, I mean, it could be the right people, but they're not who they need to be yet, right? And so you need to make sure there's that development. So that one I think is huge. I love that they included that. It's kind of neat to see this. This is more than just the technical stuff, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to see the difference in the two responses as just a generic, we weren't really specific. So it gave fairly generic, that could be said about any business, really, these tenets there. But then you ask it about, well, as an experienced cannabis grower, what advice would you give? And it gets a little bit more detailed about that. It's pretty powerful. Actually, it's pretty interesting.
And like you said, the invest in your team thing, when I think about closing the loop on the financials, like there's the labor cost of someone who's trained or someone who's not, there's the long-term impact of mistakes that are made. And then there's this wonderful brand opportunity when you facilitate the progression of someone onto bigger and better things. And, everyone does it to Tahir, but you think about Tahir going through the NCIA and then vaulting into a leadership position in the emerging New Jersey cannabis cultivation market. Like, it's really cool, right? And that's because people invested in him, he reinvested, and we built this thing. We felt like we built this thing together, right? And when I see really well-run facilities, it's because they have really clear SOPs, really awesome training opportunities, opportunities for growth, or opportunities to continue to master what you do at a certain clip that qualifies you to do something else. And, you know, as silly as that sounds, it's just organizing your business, and investing in your team doesn't mean that you pay everyone hundreds of thousands of dollars that works there. It's that you give people the opportunities to get a skill set that allows them to run their own facility. If they take advantage of that, think about all the people they trained with along the way, trained side by side, all, you know, it's, you just create this different culture where everyone's down to pick up a mop, everyone's down to read the Troll Master on the wall or Grow Link on the wall. I just use cultivation experiences, mainly where my background is, but I think we both.
That's what you got to go with. Yeah, I love it. You know, shout out to Tahir. I mean, I'm stoked to check out his dispensary. We're going to do the workshop tour. He's going to stop in Trenton, actually. You know, he's connected us with some great local leaders there as well that we're partnering with. Black Cannabis, Phil, I can't think of Phil Charles. Phil Charles, we're talking with him about doing some collaboration there. And, you know, just, yeah, it's really exciting to see the progression that Tahir has gone through. You know, I think, you know, I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but, you know, he was in finance, right? He was in I think like Morgan Stanley or some company like that. And he said he dropped that and went and became a bud tender and started there at the ground level, so to speak, for retail. And now he's, you know, got, I think he's going to have a really state-of-the-art dispensary that's going to be like the dispensary of the future out there in New Jersey. So it's one of the reasons, like when he said, hey, you want to come to Trenton for the tour? I said, absolutely. I want to check out your spot, man. So yeah, definitely.
You know, like, let's ask the GrowBot a question in regards to that, because I think about the importance of collaboration and synergy within the cannabis space, right? It seems sort of corny, but it's something you talk about with Down Mastery, what we talk about with the friends that are connected here, right? Like, what's the importance of synergy and collaboration in the evolving cannabis market? Because I think it allows everyone to differentiate themselves, whether they're locally tied to a cool product or process or team, or they're a large MSO and they serve a certain market share. But I think differentiating yourself doesn't have to mean that you're on an island, right? And I think that's one of the misnomers in this space, where people feel like they can't be a part of stuff, or they have secret sauce or whatever it is, so they can't join a club and share, when maybe that is the path to, you know, success.
I love it. I love what this thing is writing out here. It's putting it in such a structured manner, because as you mentioned, we talk about synergy and collaboration all the time. And, you know, some folks, I think it's really ingrained in the culture. Some folks, it's honestly lip service at the end of the day, because the second you go further down the route of trying to paper up and put things on in writing, there's not really collaboration there. But these are the tangible reasons. Knowledge sharing, it's so important in our industry, right? Strength in numbers, another thing. I mean, you know, we did lobby days recently, and one of the things that was pointed out is that the cannabis industry is a drop in the bucket compared to the lobbying from other industries. And other industries are now lobbying in cannabis, or will be pretty soon if they're not already, right? And so, you know, we need to really recognize that we need strength in numbers, and we need to really collaborate and find synergies, not worry about where we don't agree all the time. Sometimes, look, there's a fundamental difference that needs to be addressed, but most of the time we're really driving towards the same damn thing, and we need to work together. So, no, I love that. Strength in numbers, economies of scale, access to new markets, diversification, innovation, financial stability. Can you pull, how do you pull transcripts from ChatGPT? How does that work?
I could send you this conversation. I could save it.
It's like a one-pager for training, right? Like really trying to understand the impact that we're all trying to make. I love it.
Yeah, I think Mike's going to be on ChatGPT, you know, in the coming days.
I mean, this is a whole blog post. Like, you just basically ask one question, you get a blog post. You know, it's like add a couple, you know, sprinkle in your personal experience, right?
That's the thing. Yeah. You gotta personalize it, give that personal insight, because it's sometimes it's generic, and you gotta like drill down with it a little bit more and ask follow-up questions. But you're always going to have to tweak it and give your personal take. But yes, it's definitely a very powerful. I'm still amazed when we type in these questions. I'm still amazed at like how it just spits all this out. It's still really exciting to me.
Yeah,
It'll go
absolutely.
deep on science for you too. Yeah. So that said, right, we have this outline that ChatGPT is framing for us on inclusivity and how to share knowledge and the power of working together and collaborating and things like that. In that vein, because the GrowBot can just continue to answer questions, I'm curious, like, what mentors did you have in the space? And I almost want to ask the GrowBot this, like, what are the top 5 minority cannabis leaders, period?
And that's only going to be through 2021, right? So
Yeah.
maybe some leaders that have emerged recently. So I'm curious.
And that's why I know you're not going to be on it, so don't get too upset with your ego.
Here we go. So it's up to 20. Yeah.
But I think it gives us a chance to talk about
Wow.
of who these heroes are in the space, right? And I think that there are local heroes, there are regional heroes, there are people that did something really specific that paved a way for an industry or a team or a group or a brand. And that's not going to be caught here. But it brings up a great point, like Al Harrington, right? Thank you for professional sports for showing the business viability of what we do and allowing minorities to enter into the space with capital and build really cool brands that are minority owned, minority driven, minority run, which at least gives a broader voice to the ownership share of the market as a whole. But curious your thoughts here, or anyone you wanted to add. I mean, it's a pretty loaded question, but I wanted the opportunity to again celebrate some of these. And there's a number of names that I don't see up here that I would like to in the future.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many people, right? The first person that comes to mind for me is Khadijah Adams. She was the chair of the DEI committee when I was on the committee myself before I joined NCIA's staff officially. We mentioned Tahir. Tahir was at the organization when Khadijah was the chair there. And I've also worked on some projects outside of NCIA, like some consulting projects and stuff like that with Khadijah's consulting company. Khadijah is a trailblazer, and she has just always looking to bring other people up, lift other people up. I've seen her in situations where people are trying to tear her down, and she figures out a way to kind of flip it on its head and say, okay, like she's not going to roll over and just be like a pushover, so to speak. In that way, what she does is she figures out how to, take the situation and kind of transform it so that, okay, there's maybe some negativity here, there's some egos in the room that need to be kind of put aside. How do we transform this into a positive situation so that we can all uplift each other? I've literally seen her do it multiple times and time again. So that's somebody that I really learned a lot from in the industry. I took over the podcast hosting from her. I really got to learn a lot about hosting the podcast from being kind of like her guest host, co-host person, the behind the scenes stuff, all of that stuff. So Khadijah Adams is somebody that I always think of as somebody that is a great leader in the space because she's helped so many others come along. Hope Wiseman, you mentioned here. I got the privilege of working with Hope on something recently, and just again, somebody that just really knows how to kind of navigate all these different spaces and do it with such I don't know the right word, but just, it handles and navigates these difficult situations and challenging situations with what makes it look like ease, but isn't, right? I think that's kind of something there for me that I would say. So those are some people that definitely come to mind. Chris Jackson, the vice chair of the NCAA board, currently. Chris Jackson, somebody that I have really tremendous and deep respect for. And Chris has, again, like watching him navigate, I think, difficult situations with ease and just, class and grace, and just being able to just do things in such a way where, I've had to reach out to him on numerous occasions when I've been in a situation at the NCIA, whether it was DEI committee or the power hour, and maybe some tension started flaring in different rooms, in different Zoom rooms we were in. Rebecca Collette, I've also looked to her for help. and support to them together and they've been able to help me kind of figure out how to navigate their difficult situations that could have been honestly situations that could have tanked what we were doing as a whole in the DEI program. So those are the people that come to mind for me. Khadijah Adams, Rebecca Collette, and of course Chris Jackson. So yeah.
I think, yeah, I appreciate that. We could, I think, name a lot of names of people that are in various positions across the industry that are supporting this movement, right? What I think about is, what do they all have in common? And I think their success is in a lot of ways tied to the stories you just told, right? That anecdotal nimbleness, the ability to duck, dodge, weave, and take advantage of the right scenarios. And when they have something, know it and own it, right? And I think we see a lot more of that as the industry progresses, and we get away from bro science and, falsifying numbers and more into metrics and data and proving it out. So we have a little bit more fair operating opportunity for minorities. I think we could probably ask a ton more questions. Mike, I want to open it up to you, and maybe is there anything you want to throw at the GrowBot? I'll formulate a few more too. Will, if you got one, toss it out there.
I can't think of anything off the top of my head to ask it. It's kind of honestly, it's a little daunting. Like it's where do I even begin to go with this thing? I think
Well, what's been top of mind for you, like this week? Or like the past few weeks, what's been top of mind, something you've been really thinking about?
Top of mind for me has been kind of what we just talked about right now, is how to navigate difficult situations that could be, hotbeds of really just, of a lot of I can't think of the word, but vitriol or strife or, people fighting with each other. I think that's been really a big thing for me the last couple of weeks, is just how to navigate these situations, which is why when you ask the question of who it is that I look to, I thought of these people instantly because I've been either talking with them or thinking about them and how to help me navigate some of these things. So I would say, and maybe this isn't cannabis specific, but I'm curious to what the GrowBot has to say about, what is some advice for navigating hotbed situations? I can't think of the right word. I'm drawing a blank.
Hot button topics.
Hot button topics. Yeah, that's the word. Not a hotbed. Hot button
topics.
Related to. I guess we can be cannabis specific. Related to diversity in cannabis.
I got a follow-up question, man.
Good question.
I want to throw something messed up at the GrowBot, but let's do it.
All right, let's see here. It's thinking a little bit. Okay, here we go. Some advice: educate yourself, listen and empathize.
Okay, yeah. So it's a lot of the generic kind of.
Yeah.
We got there. We understand this part. We may not always succeed at these individual things because there's always more things to uncover. But let's see I want to get deeper with it. I want to get what is the actual technique.
I got a question. I got it.
Yeah.
How do we measure the financial impact of diversity in the cannabis industry?
Okay.
Let's close the loop. That's what everybody's talking about. If you can't make money, it doesn't make sense. So how do we measure diversity? And this is going to be my response to this, is like, I've got a couple of ways where diversity is going to positively impact the bottom line. I'm curious what the GrowBot has to say about it.
So it's using,
using generic
business metric,
yeah,
methodologies, right?
So actually, a couple things I want to add to this. If you can scroll up. So there was a study that was done by, I want to say it was Supernova Women that put this study together. And it was done, I believe, with data from Oakland and maybe LA or something like that. It was a small study because, of course, the funding for the study wasn't massive. I want to say it was Weed Maps that funded it. But it was a great start to answering this question for that, because the reality is that we talk about this a lot. We don't have enough data in cannabis about this specific issue. So the number one answer, economic contribution studies, the problem is we don't have that information properly. You go to different cities or states that are tasked with social equity programs and investing money in that, and they need to show this stuff, but we're just not seeing it yet. So I think that's an interesting factor right there. Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Dow Mastery. The Dow Mastery Group have dedicated their careers to cannabis, cannabusiness, and natural Taoist medicine in order to build a foundation of generational wealth in cannabis and natural wellness. If you need to grow your business, enhance your company culture, harmonize business relationships, or take a deep dive into the whys of your business, then reach out to Mike Lomuto directly on LinkedIn or via email to learn more and explore a relationship with Dow Mastery today.
Jesse, what are your thoughts on this list, man?
I think it's making diversity generic as a term of like diversifying your investment in the cannabis space. And I was really trying to get more at the diversity of people that you have working there.
Right.
So for me, it's like, clarifying, there's a couple of things on here, right? Market penetration is the one where I'm like, okay, there are people that you work with or that work for you that can impact the narrative of your brand, who sees your brand and how they see it, how they use it, how they enjoy it. The spokespeople for your brand are genuine representatives, right? So the more diverse audience that works for you, the more diverse products you can make, because you have a larger immediate test audience that can go out and give feedback, honest to goodness feedback that drives the business, right? But then I also think about labor. And anytime I go into a market, I'm always thinking about the local availability of labor, right? That it might be a number of different minorities mixed across the board that satisfy entry-level positions and ultimately become directors of cultivation running these facilities. Whereas there's another penetration element too of people that have, degrees and whatnot coming into this space. But I think that diversity opens you up to a different kind of work culture and prepares you for a different kind of work culture in the future. All the surrounding elements of cannabis, solutions sold to the cannabis space, investments in and out of cannabis space. So really what I was trying to get at is like the value of having a diverse crew oftentimes means that your whole crew is just all in now. They're like, oh, dude, did you meet so-and-so who has a great story, or so-and-so came through here, this guy was in the army, or diversity of all types, right?
Yeah. So look, you hit on a couple of points here I wanted to kind of just talk about is, kind of some of the elephants in the rooms when we're in these spaces is, we are seeing diversity in certain areas, right? But where we're lacking the diversity is seeing it in the ownership, right? The ownership of these licenses, as well as a lot of the ancillary businesses. We're seeing more and more ancillary businesses now sprouting out of more diverse communities. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is there's this kind of like funneling of people of color towards the licensed side of the industry. And the mindset ends up being around that rather than about all the ancillaries, because there isn't the support systems for the ancillaries. We're starting to see more of it now happening, right? Somebody else to mention is, Naomi Granger. She has the National Association of Cannabis Accounting and Tax Professionals, right? And I think that to me, it's so important to see that an organization such as that is led by somebody such as Naomi Granger, because it shows folks that, hey, it's that concept of representation, right? When you see somebody that looks like you, it's like, oh, I could actually do that. I could actually be in that space. And so I want to see more of that in the ancillary space, because I think that's the opportunity that is often being slept on right now. But at the same time, and I think that that's actually what will help with, in a holistic sense, help with more licenses end up being held by people of color in the first place. Because if we create this ecosystem that is a support system to help folks go through that and that licensing process, and you're able to talk with people that have similar backgrounds or experiences as you, I think it'll make it easier, or I don't know, easier, but it'll make it more facilitated to be able to see more folks getting that licensing. So anyway, that's just some thoughts that I want to throw out there, because I think it's an important thing.
I love that, following it all the way through. Tell me if this is a hot button. We don't have to go too deep, but do you think that these minority owned businesses that ultimately have retail outlets that advertise the fact that they're minority owned are seeing a financial gain? Because personally, right, if I have two spots right next to each other and one is minority owned, I am probably more likely to spend money there because of my history in Oakland and in the cannabis industry and where I want to spend my dollar. But there's opportunities abound, right? And the competition is heavy. Is part of this like selling your soul to use that minority influence to bring people in? Is it waving a flag of saying, hey, it's okay to associate with me, we're doing this together? Is it that they're going to grow better weed because they can communicate better with their staff because they came up through it? Like, curious your take on that as we're trying to close the loop on financial viability. Like if I'm walking down the boardwalk in Jersey, I got 3 spots, like, am I more likely to spend money one way or another because of diversity or the narrative of the business?
Right. So, I mean, I think that there's so many directions to take this question, right? I think
It's loaded, dude.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. So I think that yes and no, right? I think that it's good and bad, right? It's more nuanced, right? So I think that there's I was talking with Otha Smith the other day. He put me in touch with Khadijah Tribble. They've been working on this national social equity certification, and I think Otha built out the platform, I think, and Khadijah is the one that's kind of spearheading the initiative, right? I believe, and so this certification, it's exactly for what you're talking about. It's to be able to put, a business can put it on their, on their shingle, so to speak, on their window, can put it on their website, things of that nature, so that folks can find each other and so that the consumer can also know. So I think there is a lot of value in that, especially in today's society, that is becoming more conscious of where they're buying their products from, right? At the same time, we also have to be careful that we're not competing against each other in the sense that that's the only thing that is what is differentiating us, right? I think that definitely can be something that we lead with. I think that, in a place where maybe you're like the only minority or one of the only minorities, it makes sense. But I think that we also need to make sure that it's not just that, right? It can't just be that, because at some point, what happens now as we start to see more success, and now there's 3 or 4, to your point, what if those 3 dispensaries you're walking up towards are all minority owned? Well, then we need to still have more differentiation, right? Because then what happens is, what could potentially happen is that what if that minority owned business still isn't run well? It's not a great business. It's not, it's backed by people that we don't necessarily believe in. They don't grow good products, so to speak, but they're shinier, right? And so you're going to go into them maybe because of the 3. Well, let me go into that one. So the other 2 still need to be able to say, okay, it's more than just I'm my minority owned business. There's other differentiating factors that are part of my brand. So I think that it's it's yes and no, right? Yes, I think it's a good starting point, and I think it can help. But we also see that it needs to be more than just that. Otherwise, it can turn into a lot of fighting and infighting, and tokenization can happen, and so on and so forth. So, yeah.
I think it's such a cop out for me to say like, hey, this is broad. Every dispensary, every outlet, every facility needs to figure out how to differentiate themselves. But I feel like one community is tackling it head on and has been trying to solve for it for years. And now others are realizing that that scan of that QR code that tells you how the product was produced, where the profits go. Shiny over here keeps 100% of their profits, 20%, 10%, 5% over here goes to schools, local fishing, whatever it is, right? That resonates with that business is that next level differentiator where people will invest with their dollar. And I think people truly vote with their dollar. And that's my hope, is that when we get more of a level playing field where you don't just see shiny and not shiny, you can scratch a little bit and find out more about the whole food chain, everyone who is essentially invested and involved. And I think that's an interesting way to bring everybody back together again, of like, hey, remember all these projects?
I agree. And just to throw something else out here, to play a little devil's advocate on what you're saying too, is that I don't get me wrong, I think that if certain amount of proceeds goes to the community in a specific manner, I think that can be a great thing. But I also want to make sure that we're throwing out here that, you have to also be responsible for your business first, right? Because a lot of times what we see also in businesses that come from like that passion-based place, right, where they really believe in the community, there's almost too much gutting of the business too early on, right? Of trying to give away too much of that profit right away when you're still just trying to navigate the things yourself, and that gets ingrained in a lot of people's mindset early on, where you're supposed to give back before you actually can take care of yourself. And so I think that there's other things like hiring practices. Where are you hiring from? Who your vendors are, right? Who you're going to, what you're, how you treat your employees, all that kind of stuff. I think that also can be shown at the forefront without having to be something that's a monetary donation. Because the other thing is this, the business is not as shiny, that's less capitalized. So say they're giving away that 5%, and then the other business realize that's the thing that's like stopping them from getting more clients. Well, guess what? They're going to throw 7% in there, and they have more resources to do that with. So you're still going to lose, So yeah,
Right.
I think it's just throwing that out there. Yeah.
Now I get that, and I totally hear you on that. I think, Will, can you ask a GrowBot of like, what's the best way to differentiate your cannabis brand?
There you go.
Because I think that's what we're all trying to do, right? Like whatever color your skin is or whatever path and journey you took in cannabis, we're all trying to figure out how to reach that consumer and do it consistently and make them happy, right? And really meet their expectations. And I think it's tricky because a lot of times people don't know exactly what their expectations are, and the vision can be blurry. So it's like the more success we can cite and talk about, the more we can replicate and continue to sort of capitalize on.
And number two there, the one I think you're trying to highlight, the develop a unique brand identity. I think that's the one I would have led with is, tell your story, right?
Yeah.
I think it's like people just sleep on that so much. Tell your story. Like we are still so early on in this industry that the real estate out there, that the people out there, they're trying to find you and your products, your story will stand out because it's the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and the customer experience too is key. I mean, after all, it is retail, right? So that customer journey is absolutely key, from the person that greets you at the door to your bud tender to the checkout process. I mean, that cannot be underestimated in any way. It's a retail environment. All retail rules apply to that, right? Whether you're buying shoes or cannabis, you're still buying goods and you expect a level of service.
If you're just a brand, something that somebody else pointed out the other day on a call was customer service from the perspective of social media, right? So social media is your customer service in today's world in a lot of places. And so if you're a brand and you may not have the direct access to the consumer at the checkout, but you still have access to them when they're hitting you up on customer service saying, hey, your product didn't do what it was supposed to do, or I couldn't get the package open, or whatever it may be,
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's critical to keep that narrative organic, right? It's okay to make mistakes and misspeak and get it wrong as long as you're correcting and adjusting and getting better, right? When it gets too polished, oftentimes it doesn't resonate, but that's sort of like what we've been doing for years: community involvement, educational content. Like, how do I get in front of people? Like, how do I say things that are important, right? Like, how do I really try to listen so I can make an impact and recommend innovative products? Number 8, right? It all gets tied together at some point. The trick is specializing, right? I feel like so many of us have spent so much time in the industry. We have a lot of different abilities, but maybe not great at one thing. And the fear of saying, hey, I'm not great at any one thing, but I'm sort of great at these things, might be a hyperbole. And I think it gets a lot of us into trouble as we navigate, the industry.
I love what you're saying, Jesse. A couple of things that come to mind for me is, you're talking about this whole thing is an iterative process, right? It's an ongoing, ever-changing process. I mean, this conversation alone, right? Like every conversation that I have, and we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, right? It's all a hot button topic. I know that over the course of this conversation, I said some things that somebody might be offended by, right? Whether it's somebody that doesn't know me or somebody that does know me or somebody that I mentioned on the call, it's always possible that there's a little bit of offense happening, right? And at a certain point, from my perspective, I just have to be okay with saying whatever I'm going to say and hoping that people understand that I'm, where I'm coming from, and that we can always have the dialogue. And if they can't, they can't. And it's the same thing when you're getting your brand out there. It's the same thing when you're getting your own social media. when you're getting your own brand out there, when you're getting your own services, whatever it is, you have to get rid of that fear, because that's been ingrained in us by all the social programming that wants us at the end of the day not to be entrepreneurial. It wants us to, at the end of the day, be training us towards being employees in a space where we can, and whether you're an employee, if you're in cannabis, you have to be entrepreneurial in cannabis, even if you're an employee in cannabis, right? That's a distinction I want to make there too, because everything's so changing and we're growing so much. I'm not distinguishing in cannabis between the employee and the entrepreneur. We're all entrepreneurs in cannabis at the end of the day, as far as I'm concerned. So, but that keeps us down. It keeps us from being able to just get out there and say, I'm going to mess up. I know that I'm going to have to apologize later for something. I know I'm going to have to recognize where I messed up somewhere, learn from my mistakes. It's okay. I'm not perfect. I'm not the best at everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually a good thing. It's refreshing. Our society is so obsessed with perfection and everything being right. It's cancel culture, right? So, yeah.
I think you speak a lot about one of the challenges in this industry is getting people to open up and ask for help, right? And you and I have seen this at NCIA events, speakers, rooms where you'll have people that have 30, 40 questions, but we're too afraid to ask it, too afraid to stand up in front of their peers and ask a question that maybe made them look ignorant, or they thought it would make them look ignorant. Whereas the person on stage is just really hoping that they can have a jumping off point to explain more things, looking for the opportunity to share. I think you do a really good job of creating environments where that's not the case, where the person on stage can say something silly and fix it in real time, and the person in the audience can ask a ridiculous question and it will still be answered and respected. And I think that dialogue alone has created this environment for you to bubble up genuine solutions for people, learning opportunities. So good job on that.
I really appreciate that, man. And yeah, I think that's where it starts is, with our own individual abilities to recognize that we're flawed. And, no matter what I think, there's always somebody else that's going to think differently, right? And that's okay. And we don't have to be at odds with each other all the time. Look, sometimes we're going to be. Sometimes there's some fundamental differences, right? Like, somebody might say, hey, I want there to be only certain people in this room and you can't be in this room. Okay, cool. We're going to fundamentally disagree. But guess what that means also for me? Okay, cool. You go have that room and I'm going to build this room over here and create this room over here. We're going to be fine, So even in that situation, I still think that, we need to recognize that the value that we bring to the table is not in perfection. The value we bring to the table is the imperfections, right? The experiences that we've had. So, and I appreciate that a lot, Jesse. I think that's how I try to operate, and what informs me is realizing that, I posted something like this recently on LinkedIn. I don't remember exactly what it was, but, I grew up by the ocean, right? Like I walk literally every single day, walk inside the house, outside the house, I can see the ocean, and I think that really informed a lot of my perspective on how tiny and insignificant each of us is in so many ways. I have a lot of confidence in myself, but at the same time, look out at the ocean and it's just like, I still can't get past the fact that it's thousands of miles of water, and that just the millions or billions or how many gallons it is of water. If I just go to the edge of that, it knocks me sideways. I'm like, thousands of gallons, we're nothing. So I don't know. I love that, Yeah.
I go out fishing offshore as often as I can, and it's like an awe-inspiring feeling. You're like 30 miles out offshore in the ocean, land, nowhere in sight, and you do get that awe-inspiring feeling, like, it puts things into perspective, exactly what you're saying, like how tiny we are and how just big the world is, how big the ocean is, right? So it's really wonderful. It's actually quite wonderful,
Yeah. Good reminder.
I got another question for you, Mike. Like there's a common mantra in this industry. Oh, I've spent 3 years in the cannabis industry. That's like 15 equal to whatever multiplier you want to throw at it.
Right.
I always sort of laugh at that a little bit, because lessons are learned hard and long in this industry, despite what you might think. So compiling more and more years of experience doesn't multiply it. It just reminds you not to do it again. So I'm curious, as we look forward in this industry and we look backwards onto what happened, like, where do you see the opportunity for people that are trying to make a long-term career to challenge the ocean or retreat to the beach? Like
Right.
minority or not, when,
Right,
at
right.
what point do you say 3 years, 30 years, 10 years, 5 years, 2 years skill set? Do I take this swing and try and change things for this company, for myself? When do you stand up? When do you just look like the fool that's like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
No, it's a great question, and I'm trying to formulate my thoughts around it. I think the first thing I want to address is I agree with you that I think it's a foolish statement sometimes that people kind of, it's like dog years, right? It's like, oh, 3 years, like 21 years, 15 years, whatever it is, right? It's not. Time is always a relative thing in the first place. That's Einstein's whole, your a second or a minute with your hand on a hot stove versus hanging out on the beach or something like that. It's always going to feel different, but it's still 1 minute. It's still an hour. It's still, a revolution around the sun, whatever it may be. But I think one thing that we need to always keep rooted in when it comes to cannabis is that, okay, yeah, 3 years in the industry might feel like a lot, but there's also still right now, federal prohibition is still real. State prohibition, even in states where it has become legalized, is still real. There are still people in jail in California. There's still people in jail in all these different states. And in those situations, like, I mean, how are we going to compare that then? 3 years of being able to build an opportunity in an entrepreneurial space. Yeah, it might feel like 21. At the same time, if those 3 years were in prison for cannabis without the opportunity to be in the space, what would that feel like, right? And I don't know that. I don't have that experience, right? But that's something that I think of when I hear that statement is that, like Tiffany Watkins recently was on one of our episodes, and she said it very clearly. She said, we always have to remember the roots of this industry that are still even there right now, and that there are still people in jail, in prison for this plant. So when people think of those terms and say that stuff, I think it's a good reminder to recognize that, okay, and yet what is it like for the folks that have built this industry through sacrificing their lives in that way? So anyway, that's the first thing I want to say regarding that. But the second thing, as far as the question, where do you jump in then in that way? I think it really comes down to your risk tolerance, right? I think it's like, and that has to change. That's different for everybody. Like where's your family at, right? Like what kind of resources do you have access to? What kind of resources are you okay without? Because at the end of the day, cannabis there's no guarantees. And there's no guarantees in life. I get that. But in cannabis, things change so quickly, and the deck is definitely stacked against us. It's still not federally legal. And you can lose your shirt, so to speak, really quickly and easily, regardless of where you're at in the industry. And so I think you have to really analyze and evaluate, like, where does my actual risk tolerance? Have real conversations with the people around you, your family, your close friends, your business partners, and have the conversation of, do I want to raise my hand right now and take that risk? I've been in many situations at the NCIA where, I've had to, do I raise my hand now and take the stand, or do I take a step back? And it's a balancing act, because I know that if I take the stand now on certain things, especially in a cancel culture, and when I'm doing DEI work, that could be the end of the other stuff I'm trying to do, and maybe the other stuff isn't as far along as I'd like it to be. So we have to always think about our risk tolerance, and it's not just about the gung ho feeling of the emotion in that moment, because of course in that moment we might all want to be Spartacus and stand up and say, I'm Spartacus too. But in reality, we have responsibilities, to our families and our communities. So that's how I would answer that question, if that makes sense.
that's great, man. That's a hard one to answer, right? Like, I appreciate that. Know when to pick the battles that you want to win when you know the risk and reward. So well put, man. Where are we at, Will? Are we sort of wrapping this thing up? Or?
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty much at time. It's been about an hour. Just Mike, is there anything that for you that's kind of left unsaid, or anything else that you wanted to kind of put out there? Did you think of a question? Did you think of?
I could talk with Jesse for like 10 hours. You kidding me? Like,
oh yeah, I know.
I'm like, we just got started. No,
we just need another joint. Like,
right. Yeah, I think the thing that I was actually curious to ask the GrowBot about was strains. I wanted to kind of ask it about like, so I love all strains pretty much. Let's just be clear about that. I don't actually have necessarily any that I don't, but my preference probably is like I love like Tahoe OG. I love like the OGs. I love like the piney tasting ones. I love limonene ones. Like I guess I want to ask it for like a recommendation of a strain and see what it comes back with. Because
Okay.
that isn't that the thing we're always talking about, right? How do you like
Top 10 OG cultivars all time. Top 10
Okay.
OG cultivars
Okay, gotcha.
all time.
Well, but see, because here's the thing, right? What if what if I don't want an OG, or what if like I'm at a place where they don't
No,
really
yeah,
have
you can
it?
just
say,
want
what I'm gonna
something
say is like act as a bud tender and you like Tahoe OG, what would you recommend?
Okay.
There you go.
I like this game.
Yeah.
I like it.
We have a new service starting with ChatGPT, bud recommendation. Act
It's
as,
coming, right? I mean, basically you match up the potency relative to the proportions of terpenes in Tahoe OG and recommend maybe even a ghost strain haze, which would be outside the box, but still fulfills the terp profiles.
Dude, no, I love Ghost Train Haze. It's one of my favorite ones. Yeah, absolutely. Like you nailed that, man.
Awesome.
Yeah. A buddy of mine grew that a few years back, and I bought like as much as I possibly could, and I only sold some of it. I was like, nope, like I'm holding on to as much as this as possible, So it was just
I love
amazing.
Tahoe, man.
Yeah.
Tahoe, Ghost Train, both ones that I grew for a while, and I was like, man, those are pretty similar, but totally different.
Would you like a master bud tender? I really love Tahoe OG. What other strains would you recommend that I would like? Give me 5 choices.
Man, but Jesse,
And
yeah,
after
that's
this,
great,
ask me
man.
one. That's awesome.
Master
dude.
bud tender.
I love this game. And I was a bud tender. That's where my career started, man. Coming
OG
in,
Kush.
just pulling stuff out of a 5-star notebook, and
Master Kush.
Granddaddy Purple. Okay.
Huh. I mean, I love the GDP,
Pineapple
so Pineapple Express. Huh. I love Pineapple Express too, though. So it's or any of the pineapple type of and Platinum OG. Okay. I don't care for the Platinum as much, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I always feel like it's kind of flat compared to the others. Huh.
Do any of these? Would you like any of these? Like, what about
the first 4? First 4 I love. Yeah. No. Yeah.
All right. Not bad. 80%.
Yeah. And you're probably going to find one of these strains at a dispensary if they don't have the Tahoe, I would imagine.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Super.
Can you ask it why it recommended these? Like, I'm curious if it'll cite its source. Like, was it on potency, genetic lineage, popularity, cultural branding? I'm curious, like, how did it?
Because honestly, if I wouldn't go for a Pineapple Express if I was feeling like a Tahoe OG, right? I might love it, but I'm not going to go for it in that moment. That's not what I'm wanting right now,
And this is that customer experience, right? You go in and the bud tender's like, nah, the pineapple's solid, right? But it's a little bit fruity. It's a little more uplifting. This is what you want over here. I love Tahoe OG. I love Fire OG. I got this, man. Like this, we don't have a ton of this left, but I think this is really something you're going to enjoy. That's where I think we'll never.
Oh, nice. Here we go.
Why did you recommend these?
Fucking robot.
Yeah. What similarities to Tahoe OG made you recommend these for me? It's actually
phenotype degrees right here, man.
Yep, the OG, that makes sense. Yeah, the others were the ones that the GDP and the Pineapple Express were the ones that I think surprised me.
Yep, those are both outliers for sure.
Yeah. Also shares a similar piney flavor that you actually mentioned.
So Granddaddy Purple has they're trying to compare the effect, which I don't know, man. Like,
it depends on when it was harvested and how it was grown. I think there's a terroir play there too, but phenotypic expression, right? It's half genetics, half the environment it was grown in. So all of these could be good or bad, variable in there. And that's one of the reasons I love cultivars still, man. Like I'm always chasing, like went to Sacramento and I was like, just give me what's good, right? Like at this point in my career, like I'm not trying to be that guy. If I see something really interesting, I might pull the trigger on it, but I'm like, what are you smoking? Like you look super high. That's a good sign. Like recommend something. And then all of a sudden I'm like, oh man,
I used to always say it's not about what strain it is, it's about who grew it, because like, I get the genetics matter, but to your point, if it's not done right, I mean, geez, like I remember people that were just obsessed with, is it Kush? And so eventually you just say, yeah, it's Kush. You earn. Those are the people you just say, yeah. You just say, yeah, it's whatever it is, whatever strain you want. Yes, that's what it is. And that's it, Right. But maybe not the most honest thing, but at the same time, it wasn't like they cared. They just wanted the name. So, Yeah, it's interesting, man. I got to say, Jesse, you beat the chat bot on this one, man, because yeah, you got the Ghost Train Haze, man. I mean, pulling that one out of left field, but
Dude,
yeah.
I appreciate that. And that's what it's all about, right? Is like what we're talking about. And we appreciate you coming on the GrowBot today to talk about a number of different things, from diversity to business acumen to planning for the long term and, being connected to the community. And part of that community is weed. And that's why it's so
Right.
fun to have these chats, right? Where it's like, we both love to consume, we both love cultivars. Let's also tie in some questions on like, what would it recommend? And it's not there yet. So
Right.
just like some of these conversations we have with the GrowBot are validating our personal contributions to the cannabis community and guiding people's success, the consumption community is being guided by bud tenders and local consumers as well. So listen to your bud tender, tip your bud tender. It's a starting place for a lot of us in the industry, myself included. So again, Mike, thanks for coming on. Really appreciate you, man.
No, I appreciate you guys. This was really awesome.